Good evening and welcome to the final episode of our Fireside Chat series. As the curtain falls on the fifth edition of the Radiant Wellness e-Conclave, we reiterate the importance of preventive healthcare and the need to make healthy, holistic lifestyle choices to prevent non-communicable diseases, especially mental stress, these COVID times, through our 9 dimensions of wellness. Across the years, we've had amazing speakers, distinguished panelists, as we have debated, discussed, and deliberated on these 9 dimensions of wellness. And today is going to get even better. Fireside chats have been very, very special for both David and me because across the years, we have created some amazing memories. Haven't we, Pa?
Yeah, I do remember, Ma. What a lovely time you had, and the fireside chats we used to have, particularly when we were posted in those hill stations. And I do remember those animated conversations we used to have with those wonderful guests those evenings on a variety of subjects. And this fireside chat this time, the special aspect has been the quality of the audience who have connected with us. At this moment, as we speak, we are connected to no less than 6,800 veterans and their families through the Forces Network. And the other very loyal clientele have been the city's colleges, especially the women's colleges, the iconic women's colleges of the city. And this time not by design, but by default, all the eminent speakers and thought leaders have been iconic women role models, including the 2 that will be participating in this evening's conversation. But I think this time we'll both be taking off and having a bit of a break, and the conversation will be anchored by one of India's foremost TV journalists. She worked with the NTV for no less than 21 years. But when we really got to know, particularly for the benefit of the veterans community, we really got to know this. A young lady was when in her 20s, she covered the Kargil war and brought that war, that intense conflict that India and Pakistan had, to our drawing rooms. She has also been anchoring the very popular We the People, a show which, for no less than 5 years running, was the best TV show. And at the end of it all, she has also turned entrepreneur and set up her own YouTube news channel, Mojo, standing for Mobile Journalism. And nowadays, when the pandemic, when everybody is, working from home, I've been watching her across the country and getting out of a Toyota Innova and interviewing migrant workers and all kinds of health workers. She's been at it and bringing all those images to all of us in our drawing rooms. The anchor this evening, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome India's own Oprah Winfrey, the feisty and fearless Barkha Dutt.
Barkha Dutt would be in conversation with Ambassador Rao on environmental wellness and intellectual wellness. This person really needs no introduction. Ambassador Nirupama Rao was Foreign Secretary in the Government of India for 2 years, between 2009 and 2011, and earlier served as spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs. She was the High Commissioner of India in Sri Lanka and ambassador to the People's Republic of China. She was the ambassador of India to the United States from 2011 to 2013. On retirement, Rao was a fellow at Brown University and also taught there from 2015 to 2016. She was a George Ball Adjunct Professor at Columbia University in fall 2018. In 2019, she was a Pacific Leadership Fellow at UC San Diego. She's a Global Fellow of the Woodrow Wilson Center, Washington, D.C., Counselor of the Women of the World Refugee Council, a member of the Board of Governors of IIM Bangalore and ICRIER, New Delhi. Ambassador Rao, of late, is a founder trustee of the South Asian Symphony Foundation and has established the South Asian Symphony Orchestra. This is a project aimed at greater-to-greater relationship, people-to-people connectivity in South Asia among the South Asian diaspora. So before we get these two very distinguished guests on the screen, let's have a quick recall on the conclaves that have gone by.
The one stumbling block becomes the choice, the hard choice that she has to make, which is, I'm a mother and I have to sacrifice 5 to 7 years of my career.
This well-being of your body, your mind, your psyche is extremely important.
The problem is when society at large defines that beauty.
And I'm a living testimony. You don't have to stay where you are.
I never thought that I would ever get to fly in space.
We realize that physical wellness gives you a sense of confidence. It gives you a sense of achievement.
Yes, the trunk of the tree is visible to our eyes.
So it's drink your food and chew your water.
Indian curry houses, as they're called, Indian restaurants in Britain, employ more people than the coal mining, iron and steel and shipbuilding industries combined.
It's not the mountaineer when he reaches the summit, it is the journey to that summit.
Your competition is only with yourself. You have to trust in yourself.
Unless I have a very high fever, I play tennis and everything goes away.
Only half trouser, anybody who is wearing full trouser is said to be a royal family.
And the willingness to say no to those people and to those attitudes which say that you cannot do it.
Dalits are not discriminated anymore in society.
Mental conditioning has to be on the same level as your body.
It is something that you train for.
But the funny thing, of course, about trauma and difficult emotions is they are embedded in our body. They don't actually go away. And
the contents of this whole thing are explosive, yes, sometimes. It will shock you, inspire you, and ultimately it will enlighten you to do what you want to do.
Your every day is like that. You know, you toil, and then there'll be that one moment where you've seen the monitor and you know that you've captured something that has made the whole day worth it.
And I suggest plot a sales graph.
And I was in shambles. I was shivering that, how can I let my own brother? Well, I think the life has moved on, and I just believe that he's there somewhere blessing me with all his wishes.
To send the footage back to the newsroom in Delhi, I used to walk sometimes kilometers to find a chopper.
शायद उसका पैर मेरे पैर से टकराया होगा, तभी मुझे एकदम से चेतना आई और मुझे लगा यार अभी तक तो जिंदा है और अभी तक नहीं मरा तो मरेगा भी नहीं.
Well, good evening to everybody tuned in, and thank you very much, Colonel David and Dr. Renuka David, for that very generous introduction. It is my pleasure to be in conversation this evening with Ambassador Nirupama Rao, somebody I have known for many, many years as a young reporter to now a middle-aged woman, but still with the fire, I hope, of an 18-year-old alive in me. I know that's true for Ambassador Rao. Certainly, she's always working on something new, creating something new all the time. And we're here today to talk about something that's quite challenging for both Ambassador Nirupama Rao and me, something we haven't spoken about that much. Maybe we haven't even thought about it that much: intellectual wellness and environmental wellness. But when I was thinking about whether I would call myself intellectually well, and whether I would call the environment around us, the environment of ideas, I mean, intellectually well, I think that my answer would not necessarily be a yes. We live in a time when, in particular, my former medium, television news, has descended into a cacophony of chaos. If you do switch on your television at prime time, I haven't for 3 years, but this is what I'm told by relatives and friends. There are just noisy debates. It's a virtual circus. And television is almost looked upon now as entertainment that carries on in the background. Now, this is a very strange thing because we have so many challenges before us as a country. We have the challenge from China. Although talks are on, our soldiers are still eyeball to eyeball in the thousands confronted with the expansionist plans of Xi Jinping. We have the COVID pandemic, and we have the economy. We have parents who are struggling to pay school fees. We have children who are being pushed out of school. And we have a challenge, literally a global challenge that India is also trying to come to terms with. At this time, however, it has become, at one level, easier than ever before to talk. We're all in different cities and we're having this conversation. We've all discovered what technology makes possible. And at the same time, it has become more difficult than ever before to have a civil, robust, intelligent exchange of ideas. And I think that is very much the irony. And perhaps nowhere has this conversation become more difficult than in the very complex space that Ambassador Rao represents: geopolitics, strategic affairs. You know, there is a kind of formulaic TV prescribed muscular nationalism that you're expected to conform to, and otherwise you're called names, you're trolled on social media. So Ambassador Rao, welcome, and I'm going to get started right away. I want you to talk a little bit about how things have changed in the expression of ideas, in the exchange of ideas, than, let's say, a decade ago. Has it got easier with social media or with mainstream media being what it is, or has it got tougher?
Thank you, Barkha. It's wonderful to reconnect with you. I often recall our days when I was MEA spokesman, and you were in the front line of the press beat for MEA, and I remember the Agra summit particularly, and all that went on at that time. So it's wonderful to see you here. I've admired your pandemic travels, 24,000 kilometers across India. Amazing. And if we had, I mean, if you had a Nobel or a Pulitzer for reporting, well, you deserve it, definitely. And thank you, Colonel David and Dr. Renuka, for your warm words of introduction. I'm very happy to be a part of the Radiant Wellness Conclave 2020. Bless you both. Thank you, Barkha, for that question. Yes, we live in times of cataclysmic change, and more so as we live at a time when really nobody had foreseen what would befall us in 2020 with the pandemic. So what is the world going to be after the pandemic? It's going to be very different from the world before. And you asked me whether things had changed in the next 10 years. As they say, you ain't seen nothing. You ain't seen nothing, because what's going to happen after the pandemic is really perhaps what we need to focus on. What is going to be the shape of the world at the end of the pandemic? We talk of the rise of China, the retreat of the United States. All these factors are presented in very stark terms, in very black and white terms, perhaps without nuance. You referred to parts of the media where everything becomes breaking news, or what really is the sensational item that you can air for today, with very little perspective, and often, an inability to separate the truth from facts, as Deng Xiaoping said very famously. So when you talk of intellectual wellness and when you talk of environmental wellness today, I think when it comes to intellectual wellness, you need to have a sense of perspective, a sense of where the truth lies, a sense of being able to marshal the facts on a given situation, and to be able to look through them, to assess them and to analyze them, so that what you present to the public out there, and there are billions of people that you owe an obligation and a responsibility to present the story as it should be told. What is the worth of a story if it is garbled or if it is lost in translation? So that's where I think intellectual wellness also should apply. As Satya Nadella said once, you need to provide that air cover to people so that they can breathe in what the situation is about and draw their conclusions. And ultimately, what does the human being want? They want security, they want reassurance, and they want to understand what the real truth is. Unfortunately, in this fog that surrounds us today, with all the battles that are being fought and all the things that are being hurled at you through the media, there is very little space available to people to be able to understand that truth. And so you need that space, you need that air cover before you can really proceed. And really, when it comes to air cover, that's where environmental wellness also applies. That's where we need to look at what is surrounding us, what is the ambiance, and why it has changed so much from previous generations, and what is the legacy that we are going to leave to future generations.
So the idea of the air cover is a very interesting one, and literally we have masks that we wear for physical safety, but sometimes I feel the masks are also draped over our minds, like it's almost as if we do not want an idea that is not already ours. We want only confirmation of our preconceived beliefs. Now, Ambassador Rao, when we navigate, or when you rather navigate something, let's say as prickly, as complex, as delicate as the China question, I want to pick up something contemporary. I remember I was in Ladakh recently trying to report the story from the front line, but very little access to what was actually happening. And you were among the few people who actually had a very different interpretation from the crowd on what was being conveyed by the Prime Minister on China. It turned out that you were absolutely correct and you were vindicated on that position, but everybody else was apoplectic, and they were saying, "Oh my God, what have we just done? We've undone our policy. The line of actual control is being shifted." That was the first thing, that you correctly interpreted the Prime Minister's statements. And secondly, you saw in that moment an opportunity, and I remember you said that to me in an interview, for a permanent border settlement. Now, because I know in our audience there are so many, veterans, families of veterans, perhaps even, the serving community, I want to know how you approach the idea of an honest appraisal, because honesty of ideas is very important to intellectual wellness, of the China question.
Well, I think truth and transparency and attention again to the facts are so important if you are to be able to draw the right conclusions. And when I think of the problem that we have with China, and really that is where I think the application of intellect should also come in. And when I talk of the application of intellect here, I also think there should be respect for history, and there should be knowledge of what has gone before. Because, the past may be another century, as they say. We often try to dismiss it. But unless you understand the past properly, our present and our future gets compromised. And I think as intellectual people, as human beings, as Homo sapiens, I think we must understand and be aware of what has gone before us. We have waited 70 long years now to resolve problems on our borders. I will not talk about Pakistan because that problem, I think, is far too complex for us to address here and now. But when I think of China, the nature of our problem with China is quite different from the nature of our problem with Pakistan. And I think with China, here we are, India and China, two civilizational states, two countries with millennia of knowledge and cultural richness that surrounds them and that defines them as countries, despite recent histories. We need not go into that, all the differences that have kept us apart. But today, as a democracy, and here we are, India, the world's largest democracy, we have a government that has been elected with absolute majority that enjoys the confidence of the people. And we have a leader in Prime Minister Narendra Modi whose word, I think, is genuinely believed by the majority of the Indian people. So if a personality like Prime Minister Modi were to, let's say have a monkey bath with the people of India, saying this is the nature of the problem. This is where we stumbled in the past. This is where things could have been done differently. This is the true nature of the problem, and that in any negotiation, and that is where the application of intellect again comes in, and reason. When you think of intellect, you have to have reason and you have to have reasonableness. So when you think of the problem with China, you must understand, as we always say, we have shouted from the rooftops that we want a peaceful solution. We don't want violence, we don't want conflict, we don't want tensions. So if you want a peaceful solution and if you have to have a negotiated settlement, every negotiation between reasonable human beings, whether even if it's your neighbor, your next door neighbor, or it's a member of your family, there has to be a spirit of give and take. There has to be a spirit of mutual understanding between the two sides. Because if you are not able to arrive at a mutually acceptable solution, the problem festers. And as one of our prime ministers said long ago, I think it was Mrs. Indira Gandhi, a woman like one of us. She said, "You cannot march to Beijing. You cannot march to Beijing. You have to find a way to solve this problem." And that's why I say perhaps the best time with a Xi Jinping in China and a Prime Minister Modi here in India, perhaps this is the best time for our two leaders to sit down and sort this out in a way that helps our two countries as we seek to build a future that will truly make India great and make China great.
And yet, let me push you on that, because when we spoke from Ladakh, and I think it was till June or July, you made this point about how the Prime Minister enjoys unprecedented political support in India, which always helps a leader to negotiate a historic settlement. And Xi Jinping, of course, is in control of China. But yet it has taken our military action on the ground, the strategic sort of taking of the peaks near Rizangla, for example, to bring more leverage to the dialogue table, to actually enable the sort of framework that you are alluding to. And without that game changer militarily on the ground, perhaps that would not have been possible. So what I'm really pushing you on is that sometimes, when we're talking about the intellectual sort of relationship between nations, when we're talking about dialogue, does dialogue need, especially in foreign policy, need to be rooted in the reality of hard military intervention?
Well, dialogue has always to be rooted in reality. It cannot be, on cloud nine, somewhere 36,000 feet above sea level. It has to be rooted in reality. But now, you talk about the occupation of heights like Richinda or Rizanga, or the positions on the Kailash range. I think really speaks volumes about the ability and the prowess of our military, and I salute them for that. But that is not what we are looking at when you look at the diplomatic terrain of this problem. There is a military terrain and there is a diplomatic terrain. Of course, our preparedness in the military domain is extremely important when you face a threat of the nature that we are facing in Ladakh today. So no questions about that. I fully see the need for military preparedness. But the heights that we are occupying are on our territory. We are not intruding into Chinese territory. We are very much on our sovereign soil. It's the Chinese that have been advancing the line of actual control and coming more and more into our territory. They're already, in possession of 38,000 square kilometers of territory, our territory in Aksai Chin and in Ladakh. And they are trying to advance that line further. Now, coming back to the diplomatic space that is available to both countries to resolve this, that is really the effort that is going on at present to de-escalate, to disengage first and then to seek de-escalation. So ultimately, disengagement and de-escalation may, result in a scenario that takes away this situation of close confrontation between the two countries. And that's really the aim. The first step that we need to take is to remove this situation of close confrontation. Obviously, we have to stick to our ground until that is achieved. But the regime of disengagement that we both sides agree ultimately may involve, stepping back for both sides. Who knows? But that is really part of what negotiation is about. But that is not really the end game. The end game should really be to restore a regime of peace and tranquility in these areas and ultimately to achieve a permanent border settlement.
So tell me this, that in your years as a diplomat, whether it was as foreign secretary, whether it was as ambassador to the United States of America, did you feel that sometimes governments are actually restricted by the fact that they don't encourage among their people a more realistic appraisal of things? And what I mean by this is that public expectation, which can often be very simple-minded, can be very emotional, can be very guttural, sometimes drives the decisions of governments and drives them to take decisions that they may not want to otherwise, or they may not think is necessarily good for the country, right? So whether it's the sort of, how things went down with Parvez Musharraf at Agra, whether it's what happened to IC-814 when it was hijacked, Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, and how television was playing out the story, was creating a kind of emotional expectation among people. The government may have wanted more time for itself. So what happens is that politics encourages emotion, but governments need to encourage intellect among their people so that people have a more patient, kind of gestation period when countries are in a difficult place. Can you share a personal example where the lack of enough understanding of an issue perhaps forced the pace of a decision, or was very difficult for you to navigate because of the sheer emotional pressure that was coming from the people?
Well, rather than talk about my personal experience, of course, I've been, in the field, in the trenches for many years. But I'd like, again, to talk about what happened with China. In 1959, when the Dalai Lama came, sought asylum in India, that was also the year when the first clashes took place between India and China. In the eastern sector, what is now called Arunachal Pradesh, those days it was called Nifa, and in the western sector, which is in Ladakh. So we had the incident at Longju, and we had the incident at Konka Pass. So lives were lost. And at the same time, the Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, decided to place a white paper on the table of the House that told the country all about what had happened so far with China. Now, the very act of placing that white paper, I don't question, because you need truth and transparency, and you need the people to know. But I think the government itself at that time had not completely formed its views on this dispute. They were proceeding on the line that our case was absolutely ironclad when it came to the history, when it came to the customary practice, when it came to all the traditional usage, that it was completely ironclad. And as far as the Chinese were concerned, they didn't even know where the boundary lay. They were, had drawn a rough line on their maps. They had no idea. So here we were with a historical sense of where the boundary lay. And where the Chinese were concerned, it was more strategic. They were pushing the line to get the best possible boundary that would preserve their strategic interests. For instance, in Ladakh, they had built a highway, the Aksai Chin Highway. They wanted to preserve and protect that highway, and they were advancing their line and keeping very, very elliptical about it. Here we were, spilling all the beans, but the Chinese were so circumspect, so secretive, because they were moving in order to get the best line that they wanted, after which they were prepared to talk about it. So I think there are many lessons to be learned from that about, timing, about how you move your objects on the chessboard, and at what time you are ready to make a statement or to make a move or to send a proposal, as it were, to the other side. I think there were many lessons to be learned from that.
So, keeping with the theme of ideas and how ideas really drive the world and drive our experience of the world, why has that space shrunk? And I say this in particular because I feel like not just are we shrinking in our capacity for an honest exchange of ideas, we're also shrinking in our compassion. And my own experience, for example, of reporting from Jammu and Kashmir taught me that oftentimes it was the military that showed much more compassion, much more imagination than elected governments. And I particularly remember when Burhan Wani, the terrorist, was eliminated and the valley was plunged into a 60-day long curfew. The then Northern Army Commander, General D.S. Huda, actually was the one who came out and appealed for talks. He said, let's everyone come to the table, we'll talk, we'll solve this. While politicians were paralyzed, the army was doing this. Now, why do I raise this? Because I actually think that it is people in uniform who have to pay the price, who value peace much more than armchair nationalists who are just cheering on, primetime anchors. Why do I bring this up? I bring this up because recently we saw Ashley Tellis, one of our foremost commentators who works with the Carnegie Endowment, give a kind of honest appraisal of how he thought the world was looking at India. And suddenly you had the trolls go for him. Suddenly he was called an anti-India person. He's a Bombay, he's a Bombay boy who became, yes, an American citizen later, but his roots are very much here. Why have we become so scared of ideas? Why are we qualifying people as nationalist and anti-national based just on the expression of an idea? We're a proud, strong nation. We should be able to absorb criticism, even when we don't agree with it.
Absolutely. I completely understand what you're saying. And I know Ashley Tellis personally, and I think nobody should question his credentials as an academician, as a very serious and outstanding scholar, and as also an individual who has his roots in India, who has grown up in India, and I believe who truly respects our traditions and who understands India so profoundly and so well. So I believe when he talks, we should be able to listen to what he says. We may not agree with everything that he puts forward, but that is certainly not a trigger for us to condemn him or to consign him to some dust heap. I think that doesn't speak very well of our own credentials as a democratic country, which respects diversity of opinion and which understands that there has to be a freedom of expression that in no way takes away from the national interest. So the definition of national interest cannot be my way or the highway, So I completely see the need for tolerance of dissent, which is not going against national security. Then, of course, I believe we have to draw the line. But when it comes to hearing different points of view and being able to ingest what the rest of the world may be saying about India, I believe is essential for us, not only as a democracy, but also as mature, grown-up citizens who value the fundamental freedoms and the constitutional values that make us such a special and unique country.
And of course, that uniqueness, the diversity, in particular the religious diversity, ma'am, is quite beautifully and spectacularly captured in our military, where the MMG, the Mandir Masjid Gurdwara tradition has long been part of some regiments, where the faith of the commanding officer leading his troops is actually sort of irrelevant. He will lead the prayers for the faith of his men. So I think there's so many institutions that keep nudging us back to diversity. And I wanted to talk a little bit about diversity as the cornerstone of intellectual wellness. It is what makes this country what it is. It is, to my mind, what makes a truly intelligent being, the capacity to absorb multitudes, multitudes of ideas, multitudes of languages, the multitude of religions. So please do talk a little bit about the diversity of ideas and how it actually helps our brains to grow instead of stultifying and shrinking.
Yeah. Before I answer your question, you raised how within the army there is much more attachment to concepts such as peace and reconciliation and healing. I come from an army background myself. I grew up in the army. I'm the proud daughter of an army officer. I have a sister who had a full career in the Navy. So I know, how the defense forces think, and I truly respect their rootedness. As I said, I spoke of rootedness in reality, and understanding here this environment around us, this 360-degree kind of view that people should develop and should evolve as they should be able to evolve into human beings that have this kind of vision as time goes by. So I very much respect the views that come out of our defense forces. I know that we in the bureaucracy, in the civilian bureaucracy, tend to be a little secluded from some of those realities. Although we do work in the trenches, we are exposed to a great deal of diversity of environments and learn and evolve and grow in that manner, as many of us have. Now, when it comes to, you talked of diversity, and to that I would add respect for truth and a certain integrity of the soul, of the being, of the intellect, of who you are. And I would add emotional intelligence as much to the intellectual quotient that
Yes.
everyone wants to score very highly on. And I think that's where we as a nation and we as a people should understand that these are the values that we must inculcate in ourselves. This respect for diversity, pluralism, because that is what we are. Because every constituent in our DNA, what makes us the Indian, is essentially, the result of millennia of influences that have come to us, not only within the soil of this country, but beyond our borders. That is really, the very name India comes from the way the Greeks called the Indus and the people who lived there. It has come really from outside, that concept of how India is defined. This whole, you contain multitudes, as Walt Whitman once said. I contain multitudes. And I think that ability to understand and embrace that we contain multitudes, even if history has been unkind to us, maybe we were invaded, maybe we were conquered, maybe we were colonized, we were conquered and colonized for hundreds of years. But we have survived, this unique ability to survive, this resilience. And I would add resilience as another quality to what I spoke of. You spoke of diversity, I spoke of truth and integrity. And I would also add resilience to that, because resilience is what has made us the nation we are. We have this ability to survive. And survive with our integral personas intact. And we have learned, we have adapted, we have assimilated as history has, moved forward and taken us into the present we are in today.
That's beautifully said. And as we wind down towards maybe taking some audience questions, if there are, I want you to talk a little bit about your newest project, passion project, the South Asia Symphony. And I asked you about this in particular because to some it might seem counterintuitive. This is a moment in time when South Asia has many fissures and fault lines, and India is actually battling problematic relations on almost all borders. Pakistan, of course, has been a long issue. China, I don't even count as South Asia, but that is a problematic border. We've had troubles with Nepal. We have Sri Lanka, which has been preyed upon by the Chinese, and we have other historical issues there. And we've had our ups and downs with Bangladesh in particular recently on the Rohingya issue and on the issue of immigration. Now, in the middle of all this, you as a hardened, tough in the trenches diplomat decides to talk about peace, and peace via music. Some might say that's absolutely counterintuitive.
Yeah, I suppose that I can be. I'm open to that charge, no doubt. But I will defend myself, and I see the need to defend myself because I believe this is a project that has credibility, and that is needed and needs to be explored definitely. Because what is South Asia? You know, the assassinated foreign minister of Sri Lanka, Lakshman Kadirgaman, who died in 2005, he was killed by the LTTE. He would say that South Asia is an integer. It's an integer, using a mathematical term, but it's integrated. It's meant to be as one. We called it the Indian subcontinent many years ago. Then you have the term Southern Asia. Today you use South Asia. But look at South Asia, this integer. It's meant to really prosper together. It's meant to be integrated. It's meant to be far more connected. And why do I say that? First of all, you know, we're essentially one people if you look at the entire South Asian space, as it were. I'll give you a simple example. You know, there is a DNA testing site in the United States called 23andMe. I don't know if you have heard about it. It's called 23andMe, and you can send a sample or a salival sample to them, and we're able to test, you know, give you some information of their DNA. Of course, in the United States, information on South Asia may not be as specialized and evolved as it is, as Tony Joseph may tell you, or you know, people in this part of the world would know. But I sent my sample, DNA sample, to them, and it came back to me, and I expected to hear all sorts of stories about where I had come from. And you know what? The one-line answer said, it said 100% South Asian. That's what 100% South Asian. And that's how the rest of the world sees you, you know. They trace your origins from somewhere in Africa and somewhere in the Middle East, but that is, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago. And somehow we have evolved within this space. You have you have the city of Kandahar in Afghanistan, and you have a little village called Gandhara in the southernmost of Sri Lanka. That is the kind of cultural oneness that unites us. So when I set up this foundation and the orchestra, I felt that let's get the musicians of this part of the world together with members of the diaspora, the South Asian diaspora spread all over the world, and let's create a group of human beings who are able to listen to each other, to learn from each other, to overcome stereotypes and prejudices, and think perhaps in a common dimension, even if it's music, to understand that, you know, there is so much of healing that can take place through this. So we need healing. So wellness is all about healing, Barkha.
That's well said. So in the last set of questions that we're taking from the audience, we should talk a little bit about this pandemic and how it's impacted our minds, our state of wellness. I was personally, I would say, lucky enough to take the decision to actually travel across the country, and therefore didn't have that sense of being hunkered down. But for a lot of people, this has been a cooped up few months. And you know, there are questions that are coming in about how our world has turned online. What does intellectual wellness mean to a rural population who does not have a computing device, who doesn't have Wi-Fi? And just to share a data point, you know, only 11% of India has access to computer devices. So, you know, what does this all mean to such an unequal, you know, we're an unequal country. We're still an emerging economy.
Well, when I think of the pandemic and the kind of self-imposed isolation that most of us are in, you're an exception, Barkha, but you're brave, feisty, and you're an exception, and you're a role model for all of us. That all of us who are confined and who are part of a certain age group, let us say, we've had to take great precautions. I myself have not been outside my apartment since May, which is like close to 5 months, and I just long to breathe the, you know, outside air, to just go out.
Just do it. Just wear a mask and do it. Just do it, as Nike would say.
But, you know, I came across this wonderful poem by William Wordsworth, the British poet, and it's called Nuns. Nuns, as you know, Catholic nuns. Nuns fret not at their convent's narrow room. And I'll read it out to you. Nuns fret not at their convent's narrow room, and hermits are contented with their cells, and students with their pensive citadels. Maids at the wheel, the weaver at his loom, sit blithe and happy, bees that soar for bloom. High as the highest peak of furnace fells, will murmur by the hour in foxglove bells. In truth, the prison into which we doom ourselves, no prison is, and hence, for me, in sundry moods, 'twas pastime to be bound within the sonnet's scanty plot of ground, pleased if some souls, for such their needs must be, who have felt the weight of too much liberty, should find brief solace there, as I have found. So I think that's really...
That's lovely. The enforced stillness, the pause, even if it's taken a pandemic to bring that pause to our lives. A personal question for you now on our screen, Ambassador Rao. Please tell us 2 things that you've done in your life that have helped you be intellectually well and that have got you to this point in your career.
I think is, when I was growing up, my mother would say that I was the one among her daughters who would always be asking questions, constant questions. Poor lady, she must have been fed up of my questions, but dear one, she would always answer everything I had asked her. That was one. And the second thing is to always to be daring enough to be able to dream, to say that I can achieve this. I have set this goal for myself and I'm going to achieve it. I think that self-doubt didn't actually cross my mind. I was just one of those people who felt that this is the goal I've set for myself and I'm going to go ahead and achieve it. And perhaps I didn't listen to people around me. Sometimes maybe they were giving me good advice. But there was a streak of stubbornness, I think, that questions and a streak of stubbornness.
Well, I would toast to stubborn women anytime. The last question for you, Ambassador Rao. In today's world, negativity spreads like wildfire in comparison to positivity. How do we not let this negativity, in a sense, get to us? And I think this is a really important question, and I'll just join one of my own. I remember interviewing Hillary Clinton on a trip to India. And she said to me, she was quoting Eleanor Roosevelt in turn, and she said to me that if you're a woman and you're a woman with an opinion and you're a successful woman, you need to develop a skin that is as thick as the hide of a rhinoceros, right? So I think, is that the only way to not let the negativity get to you?
Well, yes, I think you definitely need the skin of an armadillo or definitely. You need to be thick-skinned. You can't afford to be thin-skinned. But the other thing is just the sense of conviction, that you are here and you have a mission to fulfill. And I think it's that sense of zeal. I think, that probably unsettles more than a few men, perhaps. But I think being zealous and being completely convinced about, that the fact that you're right. Maybe you can be wrong sometimes, but you have to give people the impression, and that's how you inspire confidence also, that you are here because you believe that what you're doing is right, it's the right thing, it's what's needed, and it can make a difference.
Well, thank you. I think that's the perfect note to say thank you to you. What reassures me is that it is possible, even in these corners. Today, Radiant Group has made it possible. There are corners of the world where you can talk, exchange ideas, talk politely, disagree amiably. You don't have to stop being someone's friend just because they're not on the same page as you. And unfortunately, our media seems to have forgotten that. But Ambassador Rao, it's such a pleasure, as always, talking to you. Thank you so much for this exchange of ideas. And I am going to, at this moment, take this moment to actually unveil at the end of this Radiant Conclave something very special. I know it's been a passion project for Colonel David in particular. So let's have a look at that while we say thank you to Ambassador Rao.
Thank you, Barkha.
Well, that's been such a pleasure listening to both of you, in this wonderful, wonderful conversation. And I think it's been a really the right way that we had to bring down the curtain on this e-conclave. No, Renu and I used to always talk that when we were children, Chennai used to be, that wonderful platform, that great place where there used to be great conversations, where thought leaders would come together and there would be debates and discussions, and we were always privy to that on television or even directly when we used to attend them. And I know that there's a large viewership of our very young women in the colleges, best colleges in the city, and I'm sure they would have learned a lot today as to how, based on your own individual DNA, two iconic women and thought leaders of our country can articulate their views. Barkha articulating her questions in her own inimitable way, and Ambassador Rao responding to them. Again, one of the best ways of articulating, and they would have learned a lot, I'm sure, this evening, where your conviction is so strong, the courage is never an issue. And automatically it is right out there, and the way you want to put it across. Speaking of conviction, I think all of us have some kind of a defense background here. I do know Ambassador Rao is an army brat. So am I. So is Renuka. She's an Air Force brat. And, Barkha is half armed forces after Kargil. So I thought this would be the right mix for all of us to get together. It so happened that I belong to the 56th course of the National Defense Academy. And it was a landmark year for all of us when all the three chiefs of the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy happened to be our course mates. And we thought, as a course, as to what would be the best thing to do. Because, you can take us out of uniform, but you can never take the uniform out of us. So we thought the best way to commemorate this wonderful event is to present the armed forces in the right manner in a magazine that we are now publishing, and it will be out in the stands in the month of October. It will be a quarterly magazine. It's called the Medals and Ribbons, because medals and ribbons represent the pride, the glory, the honor, and all that we stand for in the armed forces. So Medals and Ribbons, incidentally, was a name coined by my own wife. She is the one who coined that name, and we all felt it was apt for it. And so Medals and Ribbons is going to be a quarterly magazine, and I think you all must have got a copy of that. I had it couriered to you in these difficult times to Bangalore and Delhi at this point. And may just request you to just hold up the magazine. So that is today an e-launch, you can say, of the magazine. The PDF version will be coming out with effect from the coming week, and this magazine thereafter will be available in the stands from the first week of October. Thank you very much. And as we said earlier, we have a large number of veterans who listen, and most of the veterans' children are also in the armed forces. There's quite a large number, I'm sure, ex-serving fraternity as well. And we all are aware of the situation on the borders. So may I request Ambassador Rao to say a few words for our men and women at this time who are serving on the nation's frontiers.
To our brave men and women in uniform in all the three defense forces, and also to our paramilitary forces who man our frontiers, in the time of the nation's need and even in times of peace, We look to you and we know that we can place our complete 100% trust in you to defend our nation's cause now and into the future. So God bless you all and keep you safe and healthy. And we, the people of India, are totally behind you as you stand there in the defense of our national interest. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rao and Barkha. That was truly a scintillating conversation that you had, and I was amazed at the ideas. And I'm sure because I was just reading the Facebook and the YouTube messages, and I think a lot of people have found this conversation very inspiring. And it's been I love the way Ambassador Rao ends it saying that being zealous, believe in what you're doing is right, and things just fall into place. I think that was a great way to end the discussion, and I really take this opportunity to thank both of you. It was such a delightful evening, and so friends, it is a wrap up to the 5th edition of the Radiant Wellness e-Conclave 2020. It's been an amazing journey, as you've seen, and we've had some amazing and distinguished speakers all Saturdays this month. These COVID-19 times during 2020 has been extremely trying, directly or indirectly, for all of us, because we've lost lives, livelihoods, and loved ones, like the legend that we lost yesterday, the famous singer S.P. Balasubramaniam. So my message today is hang in there with prayer, hope, and faith. Do not despair, because this too shall pass. Well, I would like to thank the audience who have stood by us, who have seen us through all our conclaves, and you'll agree this conclave has also been very, very special. I'd love to thank the people behind the scenes, all of you. You know whom am I referring, for making this possible and super successful. I thank all our well-wishers that stood beside us and to always encourage us, to push us out of our comfort zones. And of course, I would love to thank all the distinguished guests, especially Barkha and Ambassador Rao, to make our edition so special. Friends, do not forget to pick up your issue of the hard copy of Medals and Ribbons, which is going to hit your stands in the month of October, whereas the PDF version is, you could download it coming Monday. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay blessed, stay radiant, and we'll see you shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.